Pipe Network presents.
There's always been this drive in me to fight for justice in some way and to get deeply involved in that. And as a counterpoint to that, I like the quote, wear the world as a loose garment, because you can lose yourself in that fight. You can lose yourself in trying to be out there and fighting for various causes and various people. But it's for your own good, for my own welfare. I need to hold on to that.
I like to have a good time when I listen to my horror podcast.
Her left arm
Oh,
was
that's
chopped
so.
off.
Oh my god, really?
Caused a panic all over the
Prolonged
country.
their deaths for like months and
The
months.
frightening, alarming, real-life tales show is my horror podcast. My horror podcast. That's
Give
it?
Pause it.
This is your scary part?
Be scared and laugh hard with the frightening, alarming, real-life tales show. Every Friday on all major podcasting platforms. Don't say I didn't warn you.
On behalf of my guest here in the Rajiv Show, we would like to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Hey folks, welcome back to the Rajiv Show, and we are going international again with this episode. And it's I love international guests. I love an international understanding of the world. It's just amazing. So I want to introduce my guest. Her name is Mary Judith Held. Hey Mary, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing good. So it's I'm glad to have international guests. It's an honor to have you as my guest. But before we get into the meat and bones of our conversation, I want to take it back. Take a time travel to high school. If you and I were classmates in high school, who were you if you and I were classmates in high school?
I was the brainy girl in the special classes.
Awesome. And that's interesting. Would you consider yourself a nerd in that regard?
Yeah, but this was before we had computers, so the real nerd wasn't there yet. It was just, the smart kids. They were kind of low on the totem pole.
Interesting. What an opening, just to open up the conversation. How would you classify yourself in the labels of introverted, extroverted? How would you classify yourself if you were in the high school setting?
Introverted.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of introverted guests in our show. I gotta admit, wow. And
well, with a title like Reflection, it's like a perfect one for us. Get in our heads and think a lot.
Yeah. It's just interesting that the span of conversations that I've had over the period. I've met a lot of introverted, including my sister. I had a recording with her just a couple of days back, and it's just interesting. It's just interesting how I've attracted a lot of introverted people in my list.
There's a lot of us out there.
Yeah, I gotta admit, it's really an interesting dynamic to open up a conversation with introvertedness, and but I don't want to dabble into that. I want to dabble into you more specifically, get into the meat and bones of you as a human being. Were you an introverted through and through from the beginning till current thing, or have you evolved?
Well, I've had several side trips in my journey. I took a side trip into alcoholism. And when I was an alcoholic, I was an out there alcoholic. I was at the bars. I was at the parties. I was never at home. My goal was to stay home and get drunk, but I never could do that. I always ended up being out there on the streets and being drunk.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an extroverted kind of activity.
Yeah.
When I found sobriety and got clean and sober,
Yeah.
I went back to the introvert.
Really? Oh, interesting. Interesting. And this was how many periods after that? You mentioned a lot of timelines. You mentioned alcoholism and then back to introverted. Did you go back to any other form of category aside from introvert and extrovert? Ambivert through and through?
Pretty much introvert. I mean, the necessity to have quiet time, the necessity to have time to think,
Yeah.
and to ponder over things, and to be away from people and doing that is something that I've always had.
Mm,
It's always been a part of me, I think.
interesting. Interesting. So you would still classify, even till today, you would still classify yourself as an introverted person? Or has
Yes,
it changed? Oh, interesting.
but my passion now is to go out and talk to people about certain things.
Mm.
And so I have to do that. But it's like I know when I'm slipping into that kind of person.
Interesting.
And it's interesting to be there and it's fun to be there. But as soon as it's over, it's like, let's close it all down and sit here and think about it all. And I
Also,
taught for a number of years.
interesting.
And teaching is a very extroverted kind of activity.
True.
Because you're out there, you're trying to draw things out of people.
Yeah.
You're using everything in you to get them involved in it.
Mm.
But after a class was over, then it was, no, I need some space. I need
Also,
some time.
that sounds like an ambiverted kind of characteristic. You have the ability to adapt to certain situations.
Yeah,
Interesting. Interesting.
I can adapt.
That's good. At least you have the ability to adapt. Some introverted people that I've met and interviewed, they still carry the characteristic even till today, but there's a lot of things that they've learned over the period which makes things interesting for them. It turns the dynamic. Some introverted people that I met have turned into extroverted for the case of personal development, and it's just an interesting. This was an interesting opening into conversation, but I love to dig deep into philosophy now. Through the period of things that you've gone through, was there any particular quotation or philosophy that you stuck by or stood by that made you say, "Hey, this is the starting of the day"? You'd start the day off with this quotation that you just remind yourself, okay, is there a quotation that you live by?
Okay, there's always been this drive in me to fight for justice in some way.
Okay.
And to get deeply involved in that. And as a counterpoint to that, I like the quote, wear the world as a loose garment, because you can lose yourself in that fight. You can lose yourself in trying to be out there and fighting for various causes and various people.
Yeah.
But it's for your own good, for my own welfare. I need to hold on to that. Another quote, it's kind of like the same thing, is the world is too much with me. I believe that there's, the soul of a person, the spirit of a person that is outside all of the things that go on around us. And that we need to pay attention to that spirit within and let it grow and let it thrive and let it unfurl its little wings and stuff, and not just all be about the work of the movement or the work of right now the book or the work of whatever particular thing that I was into. That I couldn't always be about the work, that I had to pull back from that and look at it differently.
Interesting. We just deep dive from introverted and extrovertedness. Now we are into deep philosophy. I like your philosophy. And what caught my attention is let it grow and let it thrive. That's just something I'm going to quote you on. I hope you don't mind.
Oh, go right ahead.
Yeah. So, aside from philosophy, I want to ask an interesting question that will make people think. This question comes from the idea of alternative worlds, alternative realities. If there was a particular timeline in your life that you would change, a particular decision that you would have said, "Hey, I would have changed. Is there a particular timeline that you would have gone through and said, "Hey, I wanted to. This would have changed my world. This would have changed me into a different reality"?
Well, I don't know if I could have avoided it, but the fall into alcoholism, if that hadn't happened, then all kinds of other things could possibly have happened. But my idea of myself and of the world was so skewed from trauma in my childhood and stuff that the slip into alcoholism seemed inevitable. I don't know what else I would have done. That came and I'm lucky that I got out of it. And it was relatively early that I got out of it. And at this point, I've been sober 45 years, a very long time.
Wow.
But not being clean and sober when my career started, when I would have gone into a career path and began starting my life in that kind of way, would have been different. After that, it was always tinged with alcoholism.
Yeah.
And the choices, first I went into social work, then I went into teaching. I would have done those kinds of things. I might have done them at a higher level.
Yeah.
In a more managerial kind of sense rather than the level that I was in.
Yeah.
But I think I would have ended up in the same kinds of things.
Yeah.
When I had seizures for a while. I ended up, 30 years after I got sober, I started having seizures. And I was teaching at the time, and I let my long-term disability lapse when I stopped teaching because of them. Because I said, I don't want me to think that there's an option. I have to get these seizures stopped. Well, I ended up having them for 11 years. So that was a time when I was when I was broke a lot, when the kind of medical attention that was available for me was limited. And where I lived and the kind of life I lived was certainly a poverty-based thing rather than what would have been a lower middle class thing if I would have kept my disability. And that would have made a little different life.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes what it might have been like. But I love the life I have now. So, things would have been different, but who knows what I would have ended up at. I'm happy at the spot I ended up at.
Interesting. Thinking of a title after listening to your story made me realize that there's a lot that makes it interesting. And I'm just gonna get this straight through. I really love this conversation because of how you've overcome alcoholism and overcoming difficulty. I don't know what title. I'm still thinking of a title that could signify this conversation because you're an interesting person. I gotta admit, you just struck me as an interesting conversationalist, and it's really interesting how you you've overcome. And for me personally, I want to say I'm proud of you for that. I know we just met and it comes out awkward. I just want to give my genuine love and my respects to y- your ability, because there are a lot of people who continuously struggle and continuously develop habits that they're stuck in, and it's a loop, and it's and
Hmm.
you know and this is the reason why I love conversations, because who knows, someone who's listening and who's going through the same thing may listen to this and say, hey, I might want to change life and make life interesting for me. And I gotta applaud you. I mean, you have my salutes. Yeah, I gotta applaud you for the strength and the ability to go through life like this. I want to highlight a little bit of saying, looking back at you mentioned alcoholism. I don't mean to pry over the topic. I just wanted to know, for for my understanding, I wanted to know what led you. What led you mentioned you had a tough time growing up. What led you to alcoholism? What direction? Because I'm just curious how it went. I want to bridge the gap of my curiosity from, you said, introverted to alcoholism. I'm just curious what led to that direction. What was the story behind that? I'm just curious.
Well, I had some sexual abuse as a child that I didn't really deal with very well. I just kind of hid it in my head.
Yeah.
It wasn't my immediate family, it was outside of that. So I still had a safe place, but I took it all and I hid it in my head. And with it, I hid some pretty sad things about myself,
Yeah.
things I believed about myself. And part of the trying to keep all that back was drinking. Now, I think I went to alcohol because my dad drank. Alcohol was something that was around me when I was growing up. If I had been around people who smoked a lot of marijuana or who did other kinds of drugs, I would
Yeah.
have gone to that. And goodness knows that when I was coming of age, there
Yeah.
was a lot of drugs available.
Yeah.
But my drug of choice remained alcohol. And it's like they say, after a while when you're drinking, it doesn't matter why you stop. The fact is that you don't know how doesn't matter why you started.
Hmm.
It matters that you are able to stop. And to kind of look at ourselves as being the same in a lot of ways, although we might have started drinking for all kinds of reasons as
Yeah.
a group. And I got sober in a 12-step group. In a group, as a group, we're there because we don't know how you get up in the morning and don't get drunk. We just couldn't figure out how to do that. How do we stay sober? We would get up in the morning, I'm not going to drink today. Before you know it, we're drunk.
It's yeah.
So
Interesting.
helping each other figure that out was a very important thing. Being
Yeah.
a part of a group that had that same thing happening.
But then you mentioned you were in a group. Who was the person who initially thought, "Hey, this is damaging our relationship. This is damaging our lives"? Who was the person who said that? Who said, "Hey, we need to change," in your group, in your circle?
Well, all of us were part of the AA community that Bill W. and Dr. Bob started back in the 30s.
Okay.
And the groups formed around their principles. And there wasn't really, within a group, there isn't really any standout who does the whole thing. We're just all kind of there. Some
Yeah.
of us might have more sobriety than others, but we're all equal in our fight.
No, I mean,
We're all only one drink from a drunk.
I meant to say that in your circle of friends before you got into rehab, who was the person saying, "Hey, this is damaging this is damaging our lives. Was there a particular friend?
Me,
Oh, you were the person.
me.
Interesting.
I was the first one to move out.
Interesting.
I was
And
the first
are you
one.
are you still associated with the circle, or you've moved? You've
Yeah.
moved, or they they came along with you.
I'm still associated with some of them. Some of them didn't come along. But I'm still in the 12-step group in a larger sense. The 12-step groups, like if I move around, and I have moved to different places, I
Yeah.
find 12-step groups there and become part of them.
Yeah.
And that becomes my group. So there's lots of places to go. Once you've made the commitment to sobriety, once you've figured out, what you need to do to make it through those days without drinking,
Yeah.
you still need to be around other people who are still at that spot.
Yeah.
You need to help each other do it. You need to help newcomers. You need to help people who've been there for a long time. We all still need help on our sobriety.
Interesting. This is a powerful conversation. I gotta admit, I hope people, our listeners out there, are listening and taking notes, because this is an interesting, it's an interesting conversation. I gotta admit. So, so after accepting change, I gotta ask. Well, you've mentioned you've been sober for a very, very long time. How did it feel on the first year? Was there anything that made you, that tried to trick you to go back to drinking, or were there were there tiny moments? What was the first year, looking back?
The first year, I held on to the program and to the people around me very closely, because it was during the first year and a half of sobriety that my mother and then my brother died. And a man that I was close to, his mother and his father died. And we went through, it seemed like that whole year we were in nursing homes and hospitals and in memorials and in funerals, and that was what was happening. And our natural inclination would be to drink, and we were not drinking. And so the other thing we knew was to hold on to each other and just go through that.
My God, that was a
So
challenge. That must have been the
Oh.
challenge.
that was a real challenge.
But then I'm glad that you managed to stay strong and headstrong, because taking that first step is one of the most difficult challenges of all. I gotta admit. I mean, yeah. But I'm glad. I'm glad that saying. And then the following years were the years that temptation called you back, or were there years that
There,
once you let go, it was just a roller coaster?
there weren't things that would happen in particular that would make me want to drink, but it would be at certain times. It's like when I got 10 years sober or 20 years sober, those nice round numbers. You
Yeah.
like to say in your head, well, I've been sober 20 years. I bet I could have a drink. And it's like, no,
It defeats
you
the
haven't
purpose.
learned yet. You're never going to learn. Stop it.
It defeats the purpose.
Yes, yes. So those, thinking about those nice round years, I should be better than that now. What have I been doing? I'm not doing well.
Yeah.
But the deal is, you got into it. I got into it because I wanted to stay sober, and I'm still sober.
That's good.
And
That's
most
good.
of the time it's been pretty good time. Now
Good,
the
good.
seizure years,
Yeah.
the seizure years were bad years. The seizure years turned out to be from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder,
Yeah.
from a lot of things that happened when I was drinking, plus the stuff that I never dealt with from my childhood.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that was hidden in there, and I wouldn't face it mentally and emotionally. So physically it came out.
Yeah.
But it took them a long time to figure out what I had. First, they thought I had stress. Then they thought I had epilepsy. Then they thought I had conversion disorder. I went to the doctors. I got all these tests run for 5 years. The first
Wow.
5 years of seizures, I couldn't do anything.
Mm.
I couldn't successfully do anything. I was just seizing. I tried to work. I would have seizures. They'd have to take me home. I gave up teaching and got an easier job, became a bookkeeper. It was like such an easy job with such nice people, and couldn't have asked for anything better. And I'm still seizing, and they have to take me home. And this is like a disruption to everybody's day.
Yeah.
Because they look kind of like grandma, but my trunk wouldn't move.
Yeah.
And I could talk.
Yeah.
I would talk and say, I'm going to be okay. Don't worry about it. But it would scare people to death because my arms and my legs would be flying around and my head would be flying around and my shoulders are going back and forth. And so finally I just stopped going anywhere. And that lasted, like I say, for about 5 years.
Wow. And then wow. 5 years.
Yeah, it was a long time. And I looked up at the end of those 5 years and I said, something better has to happen. This is not good. I am not having a good time with this life. So what I did, they had me on all kinds of drugs. I started weaning myself off the drugs because they just made me sleep and they made me sick and they weren't any good.
Yeah.
And so I started weaning myself off. And I went to my psychiatrist and he did a blood draw. And he said, you don't have a therapeutic level of this drug in your system. You need to up the amount of drug you have in there. And I'm saying, well, I figured that since I was tired and sick, that I could slowly go off it. And he broke in and he said, now you have a choice. You can take it on your own, or we'll hospitalize you and make sure you get that drug. So here, psychiatrists are like the only ones that can just actually pick you up and throw you in the hospital. Your doctor might urge you to go there, but your psychiatrist can have the police take you and put you there. So this was a very scary statement on his part. So I said, okay, well, I'll take the pill. And I left that one and I started looking around town to find a different psychiatrist, to find somebody else to go to. And when my appointments would come, I would say, I forgot, I'll have to reschedule, whatever, until I got a new psychiatrist, got established with him. And the first time he knew I was leaving was when I requested my records to my new guy. So I ducked that one, it was scary. I did not want to be hospitalized and have to take even more of that drug. I did not want that to happen. And I managed it so that it didn't. It was very good. And then the next guy, we started on trying to figure out if I could figure out when I was going to have seizures. And we kind of did a little detective thing and we figured out how I could make sure that I'd have some time. And I started working about 9 hours a week. And I go to like 3 meetings a week. And that was what I could do with my life. And it was such a joy after 5 years of not being able to do anything that I stuck with it for a long time. 6 years later, I'm still just at that.
Wow, you are powerful. I gotta admit, you are powerful. This conversation just blows my mind. The amount of sheer powerful influence that you have and the power of being strong with yourself. It's just amazing to me. Listening to you and seeing you is it's a life-changing experience. I gotta admit. Before I cut this thing, I want to ask. Of course, my listeners are blown away by your saying they would love to connect with you via social media. How would they find you on social media?
Well, I wrote a book. It's called Unfreezing Trauma, My Private Journal of EMDR Recovery. I have a website, unfreezingtrauma.com, And there's a little thing there where you can get in touch with me. There's I have a Facebook page, both as Mary J. Held and as Unfreezing Trauma. So you
Awesome.
can get hold of me on Facebook. I haven't figured out how the other things work yet. So I'm doing the best I can. So that's what I've got. I've got a website, 2 Facebook pages. My email is just unfreezingtrauma911@gmail.com.
Awesome. Awesome.
So unfreezing trauma and different things will get you to me.
Awesome. I want to say thank you first of all for being a part of this show. This conversation is, I love this conversation, and I want to say I'm proud of you for overcoming everything. And I'm gonna put all the information on the show notes. Don't worry, so that they'll get in touch with you on the show
Okay.
notes. I want to say thank you so much for being a part of the show, and I want to say that I'm proud of you of overcoming things, and I'm sure with your strength
Thank you.
and your power and your ability to go through things may serve as a lesson for others, and that's what we're all about. We're all about the motivation, and we're all about the love. So
Yes.
I want to
Yes.
say thank you. That's a long thank you that I mentioned. I want to say thank you for being a part of my show, and hopefully, if time permits, you come back to the show and become a guest again, because the conversation was building to a certain interest. Suddenly, Zoom had to cut us off. It's just sad. But I hope you come back and we talk
Just
more
sad.
about, yeah, we talk more about saying dig deep into those tiny moments, because there's a lot to dissect in your story. So yeah,
Okay. I
I
would
want,
love to come back. This has
yeah,
been great fun.
yeah. I want to
Very
say thank you.
interesting.
I want to say thank you from the
Uh,
bottom of my heart. I'm proud of you and overcoming everything, and I'm sure that you would still stay strong and not have that drink because
no,
you're strong. I
it
admit it that
tries
you're
to
strong.
sneak in there.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to say thank you again. A huge thank you. I've been saying thank you for past few minutes. Thank you, and I'm proud of you. Stay strong, and more power to you.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me on your show.
yeah,
This has been a very interesting discussion.
yeah. It's a huge honor from my end as well. And with that in mind, I want to say cheers, folks, and we will see you in the next episode.